There was never a declaration of war, just as there was never a declaration of peace. Andrew Johnson simply said, yeah, we're not fighting anymore.
You are listening to And If Love Remains, a unique show spotlighting people, ideas, science, culture, and art. Your host, Mike Lovett.
This is Mike Lovett, your sometimes virtuous, occasionally vile, but always virile host. And with your help, we will make this podcast, this show, and you're going to want this one to go viral, my friends. You're going to want this to go viral because we have, again, our good friend of the program, Dr. Joe Wolverton, on, the teacher of liberty. Welcome to the show, sir.
Gracias, hermano. Un placer estar aquí contigo. I am very happy to be here with you. Let's do it.
We. All right.
I have not been on a podcast. Well, that's not true. I was on, what podcast was I on the other day?
I know you were doing a live stream with somebody a little bit ago.
Yeah, I don't remember who it was now.
I saw that after the stream.
Oh, yeah, that was Dave Vance, who has an organization, Tennesseans for State Sovereignty. And so, of course, groups like that are right in my wheelhouse because I live in Tennessee,
yeah.
and he's a good guy. Turns out his crazy story about me that I'd never heard of him. He'd heard of me and found out that I lived in Tennessee, and he got really excited. And it turns out that we are both Army brats. We both lived in Europe for a long time. He ended up joining the Army and retiring with the same unit that my dad retired from, the 101st Airborne.
Oh, wow.
And it was crazy. We had all these crazy like points of connection between him. And just did not know that before. But he has a good show, Tennessee Informer, and like I say, it's not like one of those shows that you'd really care about if you're living in Arizona, because he focuses on Tennessee issues. There's a state rep, or I guess is he state rep? Yeah, state rep that has a blanket nullification bill that he offers every session. And they're behind that, and I'm behind that, of course. And so, yeah, it's a very Tennessee-centric show, but it's good information if you are in Tennessee, because today, of course, here where I live in Memphis is Election Day. Which
and that's always, as you can see with my favorite Joe Wolverton hat.
There you go, man. Repping the merch.
That's right. But states' rights is something I think it's funny. The saying used to be anything that matters is all local, and now it's become. I mean, who cares? Who cares who your dog catcher is? Who cares who your mayor is? Who cares who your state reps are? All we care about is Biden versus Trump.
Yeah, there's a whole chapter in my What Degree of Madness book about that. It's Potomac fever. It's catching local politics is simply a stepping stone for national politics, which is anathema to the entire structure created by the founding fathers. They would have considered being president a step down from being governor, whereas if you're not president, you're not leader of the free world, and so you don't matter.
Right.
Whereas those of us, you, me, other people that have a correct understanding of the proper constitutional structure and the relationship between states and the feds, understand that as governor, you have inordinately more power than the president. I mean, the president has unless we're at war, the president or with regard to foreign affairs, the president is next to powerless. He's a figurehead more than anything. And governor, at least in Tennessee, governor has a lot of, and I know in Arizona, having lived there for many years, the governor has a lot of power there too.
But I think you're right. Like it changes, economics is all about finding out, what the what somebody's motivation is, and
Right.
if your motivation is wrong, then it causes all sorts of problems. And you think about, like, for example, if you're the attorney general of a state, well, your goal is to become the governor. I mean, that anybody who
Right.
becomes attorney general, your goal is to become governor. And how do you become governor? You become attorney general, and you put a lot of people in jail. You don't care about civil rights. You don't care much about anything other than, or you care about two things: getting money from powerful people, George Soros, etc., and putting lots of people in jail so that you can show that you're tough on crime
Yeah.
and become governor. And then
Yeah.
from there,
It's
you become governor. Your goal is to become president.
yeah, or senator, something federal.
Right.
And yeah, that chapter in that book, What Degree of Madness, that I wrote, it just illustrates so much. And I remember insisting on putting that chapter in there because it's a hard, it's a hard obstacle to overcome for most people, to explain to them that your state government, your state legislature, your state governor is intended to be so much more powerful, but we enervate those offices by looking to Washington for everything.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas everything we're searching for, and I mean everything, if you want to be a full-blown communist with a you know a living wage paid to you, and single payer health care, and you know uh, 7 months off work every year paid, if you want to be just a full-blown Nordic socialist, the constitutional structure of the United States, the federated uh, union provides opportunity for that. And that was the founders' idea, that you would have these, in our case, in their case, 13, in our case, 50 little laboratories of liberty. And the
Right.
proof would be in the pudding, right? The proof would be kind of the way it is now, but not to the degree it ought to be. For example, the whole, you know, flight out of California to Tennessee, which is famous out here because, gosh, you go to Nashville and it's like you're in, Los Angeles East.
Right.
And the idea being that people are fleeing California for a state with, we have no income tax here. We have low property tax. We are very liberty minded for the most part. And so you have people fleeing out here. And that's the way it's supposed to work. But it's supposed to work the other way as well. That is to say, that street should be a two-way street. If you're in Tennessee and you prefer socialism, rather than trying to, convert everyone in this state to your socialist ideas, go to California, and you have a lot less work ahead of you to get to that place you want to get, and you probably get more traction, and you get more influence because you're
Yeah.
going to have people that are like-minded. Whereas here, if you came out with a bill that says, we're going to introduce single-payer health care, it's not going to make it out of committee. Whereas in
Right.
California, you're liable to actually get that to be a statute for your state.
Well, and it's funny. I recently did a show where all I did was recite the speech that
Yeah,
Patrick Henry
yeah,
gave.
yeah. I saw that. Yeah,
At his the
Virginia Ratifying
Virginia
Commission.
Convention
Yeah,
for the Constitution.
yeah,
And if you reading that speech, it helped me, not reorganize, but think about, like, what were these people thinking? And it's exactly what you're saying. Like, he mentions, um, uh, I think Holland,
yeah.
where he says, there's a 400-year history of a republic where you had different, you had kingdoms, you had republics, you had you had all kinds of different city states and countries that were working together for a common cause. And that was the idea, is that you could have all of these different, as you say, laboratories working one another and just coming together for certain specific and very small reasons.
Well, I wrote an article. I think it's been published already. I think it was yesterday that it was published, maybe the day before, actually, about the Convention of States people talking about how they kept using the phrase federal Congress. And I'm like, there is no other Congress, man. There's no state calls its
Hmm.
legislature Congress. And I said, and there's a lesson in that, man. Only the federal legislature is called Congress because only the federal legislature qualifies as a Congress. Because Congress means the meeting of ambassadors of various countries who come together to hammer out issues that they have in common. Well, that's only true of the federal union because you have 50, as James Madison says in Federalist 39, 15 sovereign and independent republics confederated in a union, and the government of that union is granted, which means in writing and revocable, is granted certain powers over a few and defined areas. And so when they were saying federal Congress, I'm like, do they think there's another one? And the fact is, they don't know. No one knows. If you
Right.
ask people, because I think it's always a good question that I ask, like in speeches and in classes, why didn't our founding fathers, okay, they had the Senate that they got from Rome and Sparta. We had the House of Representatives that we got from, Athens and Rome. Why didn't we call that body, the legislative body, why didn't we call it Parliament? Since we were British and Parliament was something we were obviously very familiar with, where did we get that word Congress? And literally, Mike, whenever I ask that question in class or in a speech, no, I have never met one person that knew the answer to that question.
I've been in some of those speeches and I've seen that. I didn't know until you. I think it's words matter,
Yeah, it's
and
a
you need to
lesson
know
in
why.
one word.
Yeah, and they use that for a specific reason. So let's talk about that for a second. I know you just recently did a podcast about that, but why did they use the word Congress versus Parliament? What does that word mean versus a Parliament?
Right. Well, you can use the rules, like, for example, Emmer de Vattel in his book laid out the rules for interpreting contracts, deeds, constitutions, any document that is maybe ancient to you or very old. He says, the first rule is to find how that word was used by contemporary writers. And so as far as de Vattel's concerned, Benjamin Franklin said every member of Congress carried a copy of de Vattel to Congress with him. That's pretty powerful stuff. You can't
Yeah.
say that about John Locke. You can't say that about Montesquieu. So if you go to a contemporary, right, so you go to the most contemporary that I've found that's of any sort of influence is Edmund Burke, who was giving a speech to the electors of Bristol. Now, Bristol's a town in England, shipshape in Bristol fashion, the famous shipping town, Bristol. So the people of Bristol, they call them the electors. It basically means the people qualified to vote.
Okay.
So they complain that Bristol, their town, is not being represented in Parliament. And Edmund Burke, as a member of Parliament from Bristol, goes to Bristol to give a speech. Now you can look this up online. It's a famous speech. It's called Edmund Burke's Speech to the Electors of Bristol from 1774. And in that speech, at the very top, you get the best definition and distinction, compare and contrast between Congress and Parliament. And Edmund Burke explains to them, he says, Parliament is not a body of representative of different societies, different communities. Parliament represents the whole of England. Every member of Parliament represents London as much as he represents Bristol.
Mm.
That we divide it up into voting districts, but only to facilitate voting and the counting thereof. Not at
So in other
all.
words, an MP, a member of Parliament, is
Mhm.
basically representing the government to the people versus the other way around.
No, it represents the people. It represents the people, but all the people.
Oh, so you need to take in consider not just your district, but
Right.
everybody in the country.
Right. You don't, it may say, MP Bristol. That means you were elected by the voters of Bristol, but not to represent Bristol.
Right.
Right. And so Edmund Burke explains this like, you guys don't understand. Parliament represents all of the nation. Congress, he says the word Congress, you're wanting, he says, what you're thinking of is a Congress. And a Congress is a meeting of ambassadors from different societies who come together to represent the special particular interests of their constituents, right? At a meeting of all the other different ambassadors from the different countries. That, he says, is a Congress. And we don't have that in England, he says. We have a parliament. So, no, the people in Bristol aren't represented as being people of Bristol. They're represented as being British, as being English, but not. And so if you go, so that's one place we learned that the difference between Congress and Parliament. And then you go to Samuel Johnson's dictionary of 1786, and the definition is, a meeting of ambassadors from various states to. That's basically all it says. A meeting of ambassadors of separate states, meaning political organizations.
Right.
And so Congress, that word was chosen specifically because we're not supposed to be one nation. We are a confederacy of 50 nations. And so representatives of those distinct nations meet together to hammer out issues that they have in common, which Madison says will be very few and defined because most of the things that affect your life should be decided by your state government.
Right. Now, and again, this kind of goes back, and I'm going to reference just because it's in my mind, because I just recently recited it, that Patrick Henry speech where he talks about one of the problems or one of the weaknesses of the Constitution is how it's not very defined. The language isn't very defined. Yeah, and so one of the points he makes is like, let's talk about representation and let's talk about how many people. For every 30,000 people, you have at least one, and or there'll be no more than, I forget how the language is said, but my point is, like, that has been morphed, and it's totally legal under the Constitution the way it's been morphed because it wasn't set specifically, right. And now we're not being representative as we would have before. There should be 1,500 representatives,
members of Congress.
I don't know what the members of the House are. A lot more than what there is.
Yeah, and that isn't clear. I mean, if you look, Mike, let me get this. If you look at the black letter of Article 2 in the Constitution, there's nothing that says we have to have a presidential election every 4 years. I mean, just look at the black letter. We're not how we've interpreted it, but how it's written. It simply says that, let me turn it over here. It says so Section 1 of Article 2, the executive power shall be vested in a president of the United States. He shall hold his office during the term of 4 years. Okay, well, if I hold it for 10 years, I've held it for 4.
Right.
There's nothing in there that says every 4 years. Now, Congress, it does say, if you go to Congress, it says, they have to be elected every 2 or 6 years, depending on whether it's the House or the Senate.
Right.
But the president just says he shall hold his term of office for 4 years.
I mean, you could make a case maybe that you don't even need a president. I mean, it says that if there is a president, when there is a president, he holds it for 4 years. I mean, I don't know. I'm not a lawyer, but.
Well, my point was, and I've made this in articles, is like, you could have a president who's just clever enough to say, well, we're not having an election, particularly if he was popular, and say, well, we'll have one, in a few years. Well, no, we have to have him every 4 years. That's not what the Constitution says.
But here's the thing, though. I mean, isn't it the states that are in charge of the elections theoretically?
Yeah, no, not theoretically. In the very black letter of the Constitution,
okay,
it says
so
the states are in charge.
The states are in charge. So if 30-something states decide not to have an election, you don't need to have. There's no election,
right? Well, that's what happened prior to the so-called Civil War. is you had lots of state legislatures who at that time they elected the federal senators, and they're like, the federal government is useless, it's tyrannical, we're not sending senators there.
Mm-hmm.
And they couldn't get business done, and so you had to, well, that became one of the little ingredients in the maniacal mixture that became the Civil War. Was we've got to force these people to send senators so that we can get all this junk done.
So we can have a quorum, and
right. So we can have a quorum, so we can get things done, so we can get these bills passed that are making the Vanderbilts very wealthy, for example.
Right.
We got to get
and
these
this is
railroads
why,
built.
again, we talk about like the all the checks and balances on government. Well, there's another one that we never talk about that you don't, one of them, there's two actually right there. One that was the states that chose the senator and not an election.
Right.
And so it's supposed to represent the state. But the second thing is that is, hey, if we don't want things to get done, we just don't send it. And it makes everything, it's nullification by absence.
Right. And that used to be a very powerful check on the federal government. However, that was a very powerful check on the federal government. So they had to get rid of it. And the way you get rid of it was through an amendment. And you notice that amendment, the 17th Amendment, came quickly after the Civil War, because the Civil War flipped, it basically flipped the Constitution on its head. And it, for example, the 14th Amendment, which is the basis, Mike, for all y'all who are listening to Mike and watching Mike, the 14th Amendment has been the jackhammer that completely obliterated the foundation of this federation, of this union. The Constitution, the jackhammer that destroyed the wrecking ball that destroyed the constitutional structure, was the 14th Amendment. You go look at every Supreme Court case, Roe versus Wade, Chisholm, Obergefell. Look at all of those decisions, and they're all based on the 14th Amendment. The 14th Amendment was never ratified. Simple as, never ratified. But who cares? When you tell someone, even conservatives today, when you're like, hey, let's do something about the fact that the 14th Amendment was never, dude, we're not going to fight 100-year-old battles.
Right.
What do you mean 100-year-old battles? Obergefell was decided, 20 years ago. We still have to put up with that nonsense.
Now,
Roe versus Wade, those kind of things. That's not a 100-year-old battle. That's a battle we need to fight today.
So, and I love this conversation because I think it's one of those uncomfortable conversations that we do have to have, because I agree. The 14th Amendment, made slaves of us all. I think it was absolutely terrible, but I want you, because you have a way about it. Talk to me. What makes the 14th Amendment such a jackhammer, as you put it, to the
it's this equal protection nonsense, right? So what they'll end up using they'll use it as the wedge that just rips open the concept of equality into something that's not meant to be. Because, Mike, here's the deal, and this is something repeated for the past 3,000 years by philosophers: you cannot be free and equal. Those two concepts are contrary.
Mm-hmm.
Because you and I aren't equal in many ways.
Right.
Right. And because of that, we're free. If they had enforced equality, then someone's losing some freedom. Either you or me, or both of us are losing some freedom, depending on who has the most power. So the 14th Amendment says, if you just read the phrasing is enough. Well, I should hope the phrasing would be enough for people to understand what's going on. It says that no state. Now this is, again, I always say the epitaph on the gravestone of the United States of America will say no state shall, because the 14th Amendment all of a sudden says we as the federal government, now that we destroyed all of those militarily and occupied the South military and destroyed their self-government, now that we've created this sort of military junta government, we're now going to say might makes right. And if you don't agree with us, we'll keep the troops down there. We'll keep harassing your people. or you can agree and we'll come back home. You have your choice.
Right.
Well, that's not consent, right?
No.
Do it or I'll shoot you, and you do it. That's called duress, and it's a defense. That's not consent, right? And so, obviously, but it says no state shall deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. Well, that's okay. Nor deny any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the law. That is the wedge that's been used to force all the states to accept the most ridiculous concepts of equality ever known to mankind. So you take that into consideration. No state shall deprive any person within its jurisdiction of equal protection of law. You
Right.
take that, you marry it with the fact that people believe that the Supreme Court is the ultimate arbiter of what is and is not legal. And you've got this unholy alliance.
Well, and I think you need to add to that trinity of unholiness
Mhm.
is the idea that we are no longer citizens of the state, but we're now citizens of this thing called the United States of America.
Right. And when you have the consolidation, as Patrick Henry called it, the consolidation, or as we as good, subjects would say with our hand on our heart, one nation indivisible. When you're 4 years old and you're being trained to adopt some sort of religious posture and repeat something completely contrary to constitutional fact, but it becomes fact, right? It's de facto. It's not de jure. It's not written down, but it's how we act. So you've got this consolidation into one big country, which not supposed to happen. You've got the idea that the Supreme Court is the ultimate arbiter of what is and is not legal. And you've got the 14th Amendment saying everybody has to be treated equally by all the states. Well, what does equally mean? Well, it means that if you own a bakery and a heterosexual couple comes in and says, hey, we want a cake, and you bake it, well, if a gay couple comes in, you got to bake them a cake too. That's how they've defined equal.
Right.
Now, look, I'm going to say something so controversial, Mike. You might not even want to put this out. You might want to, I know we're not live. You might want to cut this part.
Okay.
But I want people out there, please hear what I'm saying and listen to the logic of it. Don't engage your emotional, racist core. Listen to the logic of what I'm saying. So, for example, the 14th Amendment was used to force property owners to serve Black people. Now, prior to that, and not only in the South, please crack a book. New York was one of the most racist states. To this day is one of the most racist states. I've never seen racism. I live in Memphis. My whole family's lived here for 200 years. I've never seen racism. I've seen economic bigotry, but I've never seen, oh, that's a Black person. Let's not deal. No, that's ridiculous. But now think about this, the 14th Amendment. So you had a situation where if you owned a hotel, you could refuse to rent a room to Black people. There was nothing saying you couldn't do that. Well, there shouldn't be anything saying you couldn't do that.
Right.
And now here's the glory and beauty. Some people just heard that, Mike, and they're like, oh my gosh, I knew that dude was a racist. Think about this. It's the complete paradox that the free market causes in ignorant people's minds. If I say you as a hotel owner should and do in fact have a right not to serve a Black person, and someone hears that and they says, that's racist. That's someone who has been taught to call black white and white black. Because, Mike, let's say you and I both have a hotel in, I don't know, let's pick a town. I don't know, Chattanooga, Tennessee. Both of us have a hotel in Chattanooga.
Okay.
And you serve anybody. You don't care. Black, white, Asian, Indian, you don't care. Whereas I have a sign on my hotel that says whites only. Now, you can go and try to use the law, the 14th Amendment, which is no law, but you know what I'm saying.
Right.
And you can force me to accept black people. Is that going to make me less racist? No.
No.
Is it going to make me more money? Yes. Is that going to deprive you, the most non-racist, we serve black people guy? Are you going to lose money? Yes.
Yep.
Because the government steps in there and through this twisted notion of equal protection will deprive you of the benefits of your virtue, and it will redistribute those benefits to the wicked.
Right.
So I end up prospering because now black people can stay in my, whereas you end up being damaged because now you cannot enjoy the benefits of your virtue.
Of a natural monopoly that you created. I didn't
You
create it. You created it.
right. Otherwise, you would have had all the black. But once we get this notion, and once we get kids from the age of 5 to 18, and we teach them equal protection, you have to treat everybody equally.
But here's the other problem is that it totally flies in the face and is 100%, 180 degrees away from the First Amendment, which gives us the right to associate with whoever we want to associate with.
But you don't have
And
that right anymore.
that's what I'm saying. Like that right, the 14th Amendment basically destroys the First Amendment.
14th Amendment destroyed the Constitution, Mike.
Fair enough.
And it never would. I mean, guys, I've written an article. I just looked at it the other night because someone asked me to send them a link to it. And I don't like my work. I'm not one of those people that are proud of the things I do. But that article is really well done. And I broke it down really well. The 14th Amendment was never ratified legally. And so if you take that 14th Amendment and today, like I said, I've tried to recruit people to this cause of having it brought in for question. Let's review the record. Let's review the votes. Nobody has the stomach for it because they're like, that's a 100-year-old fight. We're not going to put effort into that when we'd rather fight over, let's eke out a 1% tax decrease.
Right. Well, can you give a quick Cliff Notes version? Because I had heard it, but I haven't looked into it.
Yeah, I'll
what's
send you
Cliff
the
Notes
link
version
to
on how it was not ratified.
Yeah, I'll send you the link to the article and you can like put it in your show
Okay, yeah,
notes,
we'll
whatever.
put that in the link. Perfect.
But the Cliff Notes version is that, boy, the Cliff Notes version. Okay.
Is there a Cliff Notes version?
Well, I'm going to try. And this is another thing. No one's going to listen to your podcast after today, man, because now you've had Joey say that people should be allowed not to serve gays, not to serve black people. And people are going to be like, that dude, but understand.
Which is hilarious because you said exactly the opposite.
Right.
You should be allowed to.
Well, you should be. No, that's what they're saying. They're going to say, I heard him say that it's okay for you not to serve. It is okay for you not to, because that will end up benefiting those people who are virtuous enough to not care about someone's, skin color. But anyway, don't worry about that. Right. And the same with the bakery, man. Yep. Don't go to the attorney general and say, you've got to shut down Joey's bakery. He refused to serve me and my, partner. No, go to the guy who serves everybody, man.
Well, because it's again, it creates that consolidated power. Consolidated government means consolidated power, and now they can, they have the inference to go into everybody's life and muck it up.
Right. So the Cliff Notes version is Abraham Lincoln, when reading the Constitution, he could not exercise certain powers and admit that the South was at war with the Union, because his powers would be more restricted in a time of war than it would be if he claimed it was an insurrection. Well, an insurrection is not what happened, because there was no attempt to overthrow the government of the Union. Right. It was simply, we're leaving the Union, right? So if you belong to a club and the members of that club start, I don't know, you meet once a week for an hour and you have dinner and you talk about politics. Well, you get there and everybody's smoking and you're like, yeah, I don't want to be in this club anymore. And you withdraw. Well, okay, that's fine. You absolutely have that right. But what if let's say there's 30 members of the club. And every week, y'all have a big dinner. And the non-smokers are paying the bill for dinner. And once the non-smokers are like, yeah, everybody's smoking, we're out, and y'all start to leave, and they say, hey, now we can't have the kind of dinner we used to have, drag those people back in by force.
Right.
That's what the Civil War was. Well, it was no
Yeah.
war at all. Because, and how do you know this? There was never a declaration of war, just as there was never a declaration of peace. Andrew Johnson simply said, yeah, we're not fighting anymore. Well, okay, I thought you said it was a civil war. Well, civil war means two or more entities fighting for control of a government. That's not what happened, right? I wasn't trying to change you from people who smoke to non-smokers. I just didn't want to hang out with smokers. I didn't say you should stop smoking. I just said, I don't want to be around you when you're smoking, and I'm out.
Right.
That's all that happened. So it was no civil war, and it was no insurrection. There was no attempt to overthrow a government at all. There was no attempt at any of that. But Abraham Lincoln saw and said, okay, here's what we have to do. We have to pretend it's an insurrection. That constitutionally endows me with a wider latitude of power. And so after that was all, carried out, and after the South was defeated militarily. Now think about this. Some people think this is too complex. It really isn't. According to Abraham Lincoln, the states never left. Okay? They were simply in a state of insurrection, but they were still states. Now, after the war, so to speak, the government said, in order to rejoin the Union, wait a minute, I thought we never left the Union. In order to rejoin the Union, you have to ratify this slate of amendments, including the 14th. You have to ratify the 14th Amendment. So we're not states? No. But the Constitution says only states can ratify amendments. Right. So you guys have to do that. But you just said we weren't states. No, you are states. Oh, good. So we can send representatives. Nope, not until you ratify the 14th Amendment. So we're not states. Nope. Then how do we ratify? Because you're states. You never left the Union. Wait a minute. You just said we did, and we have to get back in it. How do we get back in something we never left? Just vote. No, that doesn't make any sense. In comes the army and occupies the South and turns it into military districts, and literally by force has the state governments saying, you will not be recognized as a state government unless you vote to ratify the 14th Amendment. Even so, states voted no. Oregon voted no, right? Illinois, New Jersey. You had states saying, wait a minute, this is not constitutional. You had the fact that they would kidnap representatives who were voting against it and hold them so they couldn't show up for the vote. I mean, this is all historical record. This isn't conspiracy theory. This is fact, and you can read it. And it was never, but once they got the requisite number of states, they said, done. It's been, wait a minute. So now we're states. Right, now you're states. But 5 seconds ago, we ratified an amendment to become states again. Right, it's weird, but that's what happened. That doesn't make any sense.
No.
So it's unconstitutional from beginning to end. That's the Cliff Notes version. But now when you read the full story, it's despicable. And to think that happened, if you took the names off of that story, you would think it was some banana republic with some sort of military junta, some sort of Nicaragua or Panama or something circa 1986.
Well, honestly, it sounds a whole lot like the end of the Roman Republic with all this infighting and all of this. I mean, that's what it sounds like to me. It's you have a great article, by the way, on the Battle of Philippi, and you can feel that same kind of tension of just like the circular arguments and the lust for power that people had in order to do whatever it took. It didn't matter what was legal, moral, or otherwise. Right.
And you had the Senate, when Octavian became the emperor and became Augustus, the Senate were like, well, we're not going to show up. Senators were like, why are we going to show up? And he's like, because if you don't, people will realize that we have a king and we're not allowed constitutionally to have a king. So Augustus would have legionnaires, would have the members of the military drag these senators to the
Yeah.
Senate building just to sit there all day to pretend they were actually debating. And he would have the consuls sign off on them. He would have the Senate sign off, the tribune sign up. But none of it was real. It was all a facade of republicanism, a thin diaphanous veil of
Right.
republicanism covering this absolutism, this autocracy. And so, yeah, that's what happened in the 14th Amendment. So you're not a state, and if you want to become one again, you have to ratify this, but only states can ratify. Wait a minute. Then how can I ratify? Just do it. And
Just do it.
even when states said no, and then you had, this is okay. Another sort of controversial thing about the 14th, you had a change of legislature in many states that had voted. So
Mhm.
let's say Arizona, the current legislature votes to ratify the 14th. Well, before enough of the states do, before the 14th Amendment becomes the 14th Amendment, when it's just a proposal, by the time it's working its way through the necessary number of states, there's an election in Arizona, and they have not an entire new crop, but they have several new legislators elected, and they bring up, okay, let's vote on this 14th Amendment thing. The president, the Congress, the federal government said, no, you've already voted. What do you mean already voted, Kimosabe? Someone else voted. I didn't vote. Well, yeah,
Right.
but they were the legislature. They were the legislature. They're not now, right? I'm the people elected me. That's republicanism. If you take the vote of the guy who was defeated, you are robbing the people of representative government, and that violates Article 4 of the Constitution, wherein the states are guaranteed a Republican form of government. And they said, yeah, so what? Don't care.
Wow.
We're going to count your vote, even though you've rescinded it. And the states would be like, well, what do we do about this? And at that time, Mike, look at the date. Look at the date of the 14th Amendment. Ratified 1868. Do you think maybe the people were a little weary of battle? A
Yeah.
little weary of die? You had 1/4 of the men 18 to 40 in the South were killed. I think the people all over the country were just a little tired of the bloodshed. And we're like, okay, we can either stand up to this or just give in to the whole might makes right. And we can say that, fine, whatever. Even though, but I'm telling you, I'll send you the link and
Yeah. Do that.
the story, it's really disheartening because again, why does it matter? People are saying that's a battle. You're going to fight a war. You're going to fight an arcane constitutional war that took place in 1868. I'm like, yes, because that phrase from that 1868 document is being used to force people to have drag queens read to children.
Yeah. Or force men to
It
wrestle
is
women in sports.
yes, it is forcing teachers to call that little boy Miss.
Mm-hmm.
It is forcing counties to issue marriage license to two homosexuals with the very word marriage implies the giving of a virgin girl to a man. But we don't care because of the arcane constitutional argument from 140 years ago. Yeah, 160 years ago. Sign me up for that arcane argument because that arcane argument is the wrecking ball that has destroyed liberty in this union. It's not some arcane, 160-year-old argument. It's
Yeah.
now, it's present. There is no more present argument than the 14th Amendment was not legally ratified. And don't get me started on the 13th. People are like, Abraham Lincoln, is great emancipator. Man, it's times when I talk about Abraham Lincoln, I really want to lose my religion. Kind of the way he did by making fun of Christianity his whole life. That kind of thing. But you had the 13th Amendment that for the first time legalized slavery throughout the Union. And people are like, nuh-uh, that set the slaves free. The 13th Amendment says slavery and involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for crime, cannot exist in the United States. Okay, if I say, Mike, you can have anything in my house you want except everything that isn't in the bathroom, then you can't have anything in my house.
Right.
So the 13th Amendment, that's the way Lincoln and his Marxist cohorts, racist. You want to read the most racist things you've ever read? Read the Springfield debates where Lincoln says black people are like gorillas and there's no way we should be able to force to live near them or work near them. That if they marry white people, it's a disgrace and disgusting, and he wouldn't have dinner with them. Go out, crack a book, y'all. The Great Emancipator, my
Ours.
finger. Yes. So ours, yes, exactly. But you have that. So guess what happens? What happens is all I have to do now, so I can have slavery as a punishment for a crime. So I'm going to make it a crime to do things that are typical of black people. Right. Da-da-da-da, we win. Yay. We get slavery and we get to look like we're not racist.
Right.
So this is the stuff, man, that drives me insane. But why does none of it matter in a sense? Because you cannot undo any of this while we still have 92% of American kids, 98, sorry, it's 2% that aren't, 98% of American kids being sent to indoctrination camps for 13 years.
That's right.
And parents, when you come home, how was school? Fine. Okay. See you an hour for dinner. Can I eat dinner in my room? Yes. Spending 8 hours with a socialist teacher who, wouldn't know free market if it sat on her face and wiggled.
And so the bottom line, the moral of the story, you get the society that you deserve.
Right. We're going to continue having generation after generation that praises Caesar because we have generation after generation being educated in Rome.
Yep. Well, our time is running short. Joey, how can people find more of your amazing writing and thoughts and teaching? Where can people find you?
My writing these days, I'm writing full time for the New American again. It's thenewamerican.com. And my articles are usually featured articles because I take constitutional issues or take contemporary issues and look at them through a constitutional lens. I did do a 2-part series on the history of the Speaker of the House because something that happened was Justin Amash's name, and Justin Amash is not a member of the House of Representatives, but you don't have to be a member of the House of Representatives to be Speaker of the House. And so I wrote a 2-part series on that, and the FBI investigating Catholics, investigating Christians because they say they're teaching extremist doctrine. They are, he said, the FBI says that those people are creating insurrectionists. These Christians are creating insurrectionists by suggesting that men and women have separate gender roles and that women should submit to men, et cetera, et cetera. But anyway, thenewamerican.com. My books are on Amazon, just my name, Joe Wolverton. And then my podcast will be starting up again next week, I guess. I hope.
Fantastic.
So yeah, Teacher of Liberty on YouTube and Apple Podcasts and Spotify, Teacher of Liberty. But if you want day in, day out, read the kind of stuff that's going to get me, thrown into a black site prison, just go to thenewamerican.com.
I'll be there with you, Joey. All right.
Brother. Yes, sir. We'll be the best looking guys in the internment camp, right?
That's a plan. There's a couple ways to get skinny, I guess. Oh,
there you go. There you go. Mike is gone.
You are listening to And If Love Remains.
Gone but not forgotten.
First of 23 installments requested by Dr. Levitt. Trying to be in compliance here because we're taking him and that whole organization